Mama, that fellow is shivering. Could we offer him some assistance? Keandra glanced down at her young son, then at the elderly gentleman slumped on the bus stop bench. December rain was lashing sideways through Baltimore, and the man's meager jacket was thoroughly drenched. His entire body quivered. She didn't hesitate. She removed her own coat, the sole one she possessed, approached him, and draped it over his shoulders. Her hands trembled the instant she released her hold. Now she was the one facing the chill, yet she offered him a smile nonetheless. "Please stay warm, sir. No one ought to be out here in this condition." The aged man looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes. He whispered, "May God bless you, miss." That coat had cost her $12 at a second-hand shop, but the man now wearing it owned a hospital valued at $400 million, and within 72 hours, Keandra's son would require that hospital to survive. Join me as we delve into this remarkable narrative, but before we proceed, I established this channel because I firmly believe stories like these merit being heard. Tales of genuine compassion, authentic hardship, and those pivotal moments that underscore our shared humanity. If you concur, kindly press the subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone who might find solace or inspiration in it today. Let us cultivate something meaningful together. Now let us return to Keandra and the pivotal decision that reshaped everything. However, Clarence Drummond was no ordinary elderly gentleman, and that bus stop bench was the least likely place anyone would have anticipated finding him. 2 hours prior, Clarence had been seated at the head of a grand mahogany conference table on the 14th floor of Drummond Medical Center, the very hospital he had established, the hospital bearing his name etched into the stone above its main entrance. 40 years ago, he had commenced this endeavor with merely a modest loan, a medical degree, and a solemn pledge made to his dying mother. She had succumbed to a heart ailment that could have been managed if the family had possessed the financial means. They did not, and Clarence vowed that no child, no family would ever endure what his own family had experienced, not if he could prevent it. Drummond Medical Center blossomed into one of the preeminent cardiac care facilities in the entire Mid-Atlantic region, an institution valued at $400 million. Clarence had dedicated his life to it. Every corridor, every operating theater, every policy that ensured no child would be turned away. But on this particular evening, the board was advocating for its sale. Medvance Health Group, a colossal corporate conglomerate hailing from Chicago, had presented a compelling offer. The financial figures were astounding. The board members sat there, their eyes gleaming with avarice, discussing shareholder returns and market valuation as if the hospital were merely a stock ticker rather than a sanctuary where the lives of children were saved, and the voice championing the sale most ardently belonged to his own son. "Father, this is a business matter," Denzel had stated, leaning forward in his chair. "Medvance is offering 3 times the current valuation. It would be folly to refuse such an opportunity." Clarence had regarded his son, a 42-year-old brilliant surgeon who had graduated at the top of his class from Johns Hopkins. Yet somewhere along the path, Denzel had ceased to see patients and had begun to perceive only numbers. This hospital was founded to serve people, Denzel, not to be traded like a parcel of real estate, and it has served people for 40 years. But the world has transformed, Father. Healthcare has become a commercial enterprise. One cannot operate a hospital on idealism. The room fell silent. 8 board members, not a single one of whom spoke in Clarence's defense. Not one. He slowly rose to his feet. He surveyed the table, observing the faces he had entrusted for decades. Then he stated very quietly, "This hospital will not be sold. Not while I am alive." And he departed. He did not summon his chauffeur, nor did he take the elevator to the parking garage where his black Cadillac awaited. He simply walked straight out the main doors into the December downpour, down Lombard Street, past the Inner Harbor, through the damp, deserted blocks of downtown Baltimore. The rain saturated his woolen suit jacket within minutes. His $800 Italian shoes squelched in the puddles. His white hair was plastered flat against his scalp, but he continued walking because the external cold was insignificant compared to the chill he felt internally. Betrayed by his own son, by those he had trusted to safeguard what he had built. He eventually found himself at a bus stop on Eastern Avenue, an aged metal bench with a fractured plastic roof that offered minimal protection from the wind. He sat down heavily. His hands were trembling, and not solely from the cold. He was 74 years old, possessing an exhaustion that sleep could not alleviate. To any passerby, he appeared as just another indigent individual attempting to endure another freezing night in Baltimore. His sodden attire hung heavily upon his frame. Rain dripped from his chin. His shoulders were hunched against the frigid air, and it was precisely in this state that Keandra discovered him. But before we reach that juncture, it is imperative to comprehend who Keandra Carter was. Because when she offered that elderly gentleman her coat, her actions transcended mere kindness. She was simply being true to herself, and her story is as significant as his. Keandra was 31 years old. She held down 2 employment positions. From Monday through Friday, she attended to the rooms at the Harborview Inn, situated near the waterfront. A noon checkout necessitated the preparation of 12 rooms, stripped, meticulously cleaned, and reconfigured before 3 o'clock. Subsequently, she would board the number 7 bus, traversing the city to Mama T's Kitchen, a modest soul food establishment on North Avenue where she served as a waitress from 5 o'clock until closing. On a successful evening, she would earn approximately $40 in gratuities. On an unfavorable night, less than $20. She resided in a compact studio apartment on East Baltimore Street with her 7-year-old son, Malachi. The dwelling was small, comprising a single room, a rudimentary kitchenette, and a bathroom featuring a shower that only dispensed hot water for roughly 6 minutes. Nevertheless, it was their own space, and Keandra maintained it with impeccable cleanliness. Malachi was the focal point of her existence, a bright, inquisitive, and loquacious boy with an expansive smile and eyes that were perpetually in motion. He delighted in drawing. He relished posing questions about every conceivable subject. He enjoyed pretending to be a superhero. However, Malachi was also afflicted. He had been born with a condition known as tetralogy of Fallot, a congenital heart defect characterized by 4 simultaneous heart abnormalities. His physician at the Free Clinic had explained it to Keandra when Malachi was merely 3 months old. She retained every word to this day. This condition affects approximately 1 in every 2,500 infants born in America, Ms. Carter. Malachi's heart possesses a septal defect between the 2 lower chambers, and the valve leading to his lungs is excessively narrow. His blood is not receiving adequate oxygen. That is why his lips occasionally assume a bluish hue. He will require surgery, open-heart surgery, ideally before his 8th birthday. Malachi was now 7, and his 8th birthday was a mere 4 months away. The surgical procedure would incur a cost ranging between $180,000 and $250,000. Keandra's Medicaid covered a portion of this, but it was far from sufficient. She remained short of more than $80,000. She had contacted every available resource, applied for every pertinent program, and completed every necessary form, but the waiting lists were protracted, the approvals were slow, and time was rapidly diminishing. That evening, the night of the critical incident, Keandra had just concluded her shift at Mama T's. She had collected Malachi from her mother, Rashida's residence in Park Heights. Rashida cared for him every evening while Keandra worked, providing him with dinner, assisting with his homework, and ensuring he took his heart medication precisely at 7:30. Keandra tallied her earnings on the bus ride to her mother's abode, $23.50. She carefully folded the bills into her wallet and checked her mobile device. No missed calls from the hospital. No electronic correspondence regarding financial assistance. Nothing. Malachi was asleep on Rashida's sofa when she arrived. She carried him to the bus stop, his head resting heavily on her shoulder. He stirred midway, groggy but aware, as children often do. "Mama, I'm cold." "I know, sweetheart. The bus will be here soon." It was then that Malachi noticed the elderly man on the bench, shivering, soaked, and alone, and Malachi tugged on Keandra's sleeve and uttered the words that initiated everything. Now, this is what transpired next, and I urge you to pay very close attention, because this moment, this small, ordinary moment at a bus stop in the rain, was about to unleash a sequence of events that neither Keandra nor Clarence could have ever foreseen. Malachi pulled away from his mother and walked directly up to the elderly man. No hesitation, no apprehension. Just a 7-year-old boy with a fragile heart, literally approaching a stranger because he perceived someone in need of assistance. "Are you feeling cold, sir?" Malachi inquired. His voice was small but resolute. "My mama says no one should be cold if we have the means to help." Clarence looked up, and the first thing he observed was not the boy's words. It was his lips. They exhibited a faint bluish tinge, a cyanotic shade that most individuals would overlook. But Clarence had dedicated 40 years to establishing a cardiac hospital. He had witnessed that coloration countless times. He understood precisely what it signified. This child had a cardiac condition, yet the boy was smiling, broadly and warmly, as if the cold did not trouble him in the least, as if aiding a stranger held greater importance than his own discomfort. Before Clarence could respond, Keandra stepped forward. She was already divesting herself of her coat, a thin brown parka worn at the elbows with a zipper that habitually snagged halfway. She carefully draped it over Clarence's shoulders, much like one would gently cover a slumbering child. "Oh no, miss," Clarence stated, his voice weakened by the cold. "I cannot accept your coat. You require it." Keandra shook her head. "I have weathered worse than a bit of rain, sir. You need it more than I do at this very moment." Her hands trembled as she withdrew them. Now she was the one standing in the frigid precipitation with nothing but a thin restaurant uniform. But she did not flinch. She simply stood there, caressing Malachi's shoulders to maintain his warmth, and offered the elderly gentleman a smile, as if surrendering her sole coat was the most natural occurrence in the world. Clarence gazed at her. He truly saw her. She was young, visibly fatigued, the kind of weariness that extends beyond a single arduous day, the sort that permeates one's very being from months and years of insufficient resources. Yet her eyes radiated warmth, brimming with a quality he had not encountered in a considerable duration, genuine benevolence, unalloyed by calculation or ulterior motive, simply one human being exhibiting concern for another. "May God bless you, miss," he whispered. Keandra nodded. "Please stay warm, all right? There is a shelter located on Monument Street, approximately 6 blocks north. They will provide you with accommodation tonight." Headlights emerged in the distance down the thoroughfare. The number 7 bus rumbled towards them through the rain. Keandra scooped Malachi into her arms and proceeded towards the curb. "Goodbye, mister," Malachi called out, waving over his mother's shoulder. "I hope you get warm." The bus doors swung open. They boarded. The doors closed, and Clarence remained seated alone on that bench, enveloped in a $12 coat that carried the faint aroma of cooking oil and lavender shampoo. He drew it tighter around his shoulders. It was thin. It was well worn. It was the most comforting garment he had experienced in years. For the first time that evening, Clarence Drummond smiled. But his smile was not solely attributed to the coat. He was contemplating those pale blue lips, that small boy with the bright eyes and the fragile heart, and the mother who willingly surrendered her only source of warmth because she recognized someone who possessed less. Something shifted within Clarence, something he believed the board meeting had irrevocably extinguished: hope. He retrieved his mobile device, the one he always carried but had not utilized all evening, and made a solitary call. "Odessa, it's Clarence. I require you to investigate something for me first thing tomorrow morning. A boy, approximately 7 years of age. His mother calls him Malachi." The following morning, Clarence was at his desk before the sun had risen. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he envisioned that boy's countenance, those tinged blue lips, that wide, fearless smile, and the mother who had relinquished her only coat as if it were inconsequential. At 6:15, he lifted his phone and contacted the individual he trusted above all others. Odessa Monroe had served as the chief nursing officer at Drummond Medical Center for 28 years. She had been present before the hospital even had a second floor, before the parking structure, before the opulent lobby adorned with marble flooring. She had been there when it was merely Clarence and a select group of physicians operating out of a converted warehouse on Pratt Street, meticulously piecing together a dream with duct tape and sheer determination. Odessa answered on the second ring. Clarence Drummond calling me before sunrise. This had better be important. I need you to investigate something for me. A patient, a child. His name is Malachi, approximately 7 years of age. His mother's name is Keandra. I believe they may be within our system. Odessa was silent for a moment. Is this about last night? You sounded rather peculiar when you called. Just look into it, Odessa, please. An hour later, Odessa returned his call, and what she revealed caused Clarence to grip the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles turned a stark white. Malachi Carter, 7 years old, tetralogy of Fallot. He was referred to us 4 months ago by his pediatrician at the East Baltimore Free Clinic. He was scheduled for a surgical consultation with the cardiac team in October. She paused. It was cancelled. Why? Financial. His mother has Medicaid, but it does not cover the full expense of the procedure. The billing department flagged the case. They required a deposit of $40,000 before they would proceed with the consultation. She couldn't afford it. Clarence closed his eyes. How many times did she contact us? 4 times. I reviewed the phone records. She called 4 times over a 6-week period, requesting an extension, inquiring about a payment plan, asking if there was any possibility whatsoever. Each time, she received the same response. Without the deposit, they could not schedule the surgery. Who informed her of this? The Financial Services Department, following standard protocol. Standard protocol, Clarence echoed. The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. Clarence, listen to me. Odessa's voice softened. This young woman is not a deadbeat. I reviewed her file. She works 2 jobs. She applied to every assistance program in the state. CHIP, Mended Little Hearts, the Ronald McDonald House Fund. She even initiated one of those online fundraising pages. She has raised $2,300 in 3 weeks. She still needs $80,000 more. Clarence remained silent. You are aware of the prevailing circumstances, are you not? Odessa continued. 66% of bankruptcies in this country are directly linked to medical expenses. This young woman is not idle. She is drowning, and our hospital, your hospital, is keeping her submerged. That final sentence struck Clarence with the force of a sledgehammer. His hospital. The hospital he had built so that no child would ever be denied care. The hospital that bore his mother's name on the pediatric wing, and it was turning away a 7-year-old boy with a fractured heart because his mother could not produce a check for $40,000. He sat there in his plush leather chair, surrounded by accolades, framed photographs, and 40 years of achievements, and he felt profoundly unwell. Thank you, Odessa, he said quietly. I will handle it. Clarence, what are you going to do? I don't know yet, but that boy is getting his surgery. That afternoon, Clarence summoned Denzel to his office, not the boardroom, not a conference call, but his private sanctuary, just the 2 of them. Denzel arrived in his pristine white coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck, embodying precisely what he was, a world-class cardiac surgeon ranked among the top 5 in the nation for pediatric heart repair. Clarence had never felt more proud of his son's surgical dexterity, nor more disappointed in his heart. I need to ask you something, Clarence began. If a 7-year-old child required heart surgery and their family was unable to afford it, what would be the appropriate course of action? Denzel leaned back in his chair. That depends on the specific circumstances. What is their insurance situation? Medicaid does not cover the entire procedure. The family cannot meet the deposit requirement. Then we refer them to the state assistance program. There is a waiting list, but that is the established procedure. The waiting list is 8 months long, Denzel. The child needs surgery immediately. Father, Denzel's voice adopted that measured, careful tone he employed when he perceived his father to be acting unreasonably. We cannot absorb every case that falls through the cracks. The board is already scrutinizing our charity write-offs. If we begin making exceptions, where does it end? It ends with a child remaining alive, Clarence stated. That is an emotional response, not a strategic one. Clarence gazed at his son, and for a fleeting moment he did not see the 42-year-old surgeon. He saw himself, 30 years younger, seated in this very chair, explaining to his accountant that the financial figures had to align, that they would address the community outreach programs at a later juncture, that the immediate priority was growth. He had constructed the apparatus, and now the apparatus was functioning precisely as he had designed it: efficient, profitable, and devoid of compassion. Clarence recalled the day Drummond Medical Center first opened its doors. He had stood on the front steps with Odessa beside him, a throng of neighbors and community members filling the sidewalk, and he had declared, "This hospital will never turn away a child. Not today, not ever." He wondered when that promise had devolved into mere words etched on a wall. "You may leave now, Denzel," Clarence said quietly. Denzel stood. At the doorway, he paused. "Father, I understand your concern, but empathy alone does not keep the lights on." After his son had departed, Clarence remained seated in solitude for a considerable period. Then he reached a decision. He would not utilize his personal wealth to rectify this situation. Not yet. He would not assert his authority or override the board's decision. He needed Denzel to witness what he had perceived, to feel what he had experienced on that bench in the rain. He needed his son to recall the initial motivation for becoming a physician. But first, he had to see Keandra once more. Meanwhile, across town, Keandra was engaged in her own arduous struggle, and she was losing. It commenced at 7 o'clock in the morning, day following her act of charity at the bus stop. She sat on the edge of her bed, her mobile device in one hand, and a list of telephone numbers meticulously jotted on the back of an envelope. First call, the helpline for the Children's Health Insurance Program. She had already submitted 2 applications, both of which were denied because her income exceeded the eligibility threshold by $600. "I regret to inform you, madam, based on your household income, you do not currently qualify for expanded coverage, but I cannot afford the surgery without it. My son requires open heart surgery." "I understand, madam. I can transfer you to our appeals department. The current waiting period for an appeal review is 12 to 16 weeks. 12 to 16 weeks? Malachi did not have 12 to 16 weeks. Second call, Mended Little Hearts, a non-profit organization dedicated to assisting families with children afflicted by congenital heart defects. The woman who answered the phone was kind, genuinely compassionate, but the outcome was identical. "We have a grant program, but our current funding period has concluded. Applications will reopen in March. I can add you to the notification list." March was 3 months away. Third call, Ronald McDonald House. They could provide assistance with lodging during the hospital stay, but not with the surgical costs themselves. Fourth call, a medical debt assistance organization she had discovered online at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They requested that she complete a 20-page application and advised that the review process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. By noon, Keandra had placed 11 phone calls. 11 distinct organizations, 11 variations of the same unfavorable outcome. Not at this moment. Not yet. Complete this form. Join this queue. Wait. She placed the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. She refused to weep. Not during the daytime. Weeping was reserved for 2 o'clock in the morning when Malachi was asleep and could not hear. That afternoon, she collected Malachi from school. Typically, he would dash out the front door at full speed, his backpack bouncing, recounting the events of his day before he even reached the car. Today he walked slowly. His teacher, Ms. Tanya, accompanied him, holding his hand. "He had a challenging afternoon," Ms. Tanya said softly. "He became winded during recess. He had to sit out. He mentioned his chest felt peculiar." Keandra knelt down in front of her son. His lips appeared darker than they had the previous day, that bluish-purple hue that invariably caused her stomach to clench. "Hey, my love. How are you feeling?" "I'm all right, Mama. Just weary." He offered a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Can we go home?" That night, Keandra lay on the floor beside Malachi's bed, listening to his breathing. She meticulously tracked each breath, each exhalation, a ritual she'd maintained for months on end. His breathing, she noted, was more rapid and shallow than the previous week, a subtle shift she could distinctly perceive. At 9 o'clock, her mother's call came through. "Mija," Rashida began, her voice laced with thought. "I've been contemplating things. The house. I can part with the house. It might not fetch a fortune, perhaps 50, 60,000, but it could go a long way toward what you're facing. Mama, please know. That house represents your entire security. Malachi is my entire world. I won't permit you to relinquish your home. I will find a resolution. Keandra Marie Carter, you need to heed my words. You've been shouldering this burden alone for 7 years. Allow me to lend a hand. I've said no, Mama." Keandra's voice faltered, a tremor in her tone. "Please, I'll discover a way." Rashida fell silent for a moment, then replied softly, "Very well, my dear, but my offer remains, always available." After they concluded their conversation, Keandra settled at the kitchen table. It was well past 2 in the morning. The apartment was steeped in silence, save for the refrigerator's low hum and the gentle cadence of Malachi's breathing from the adjacent room. She carefully arranged the hospital statements across the table. Tears blurred the stark figures before her eyes. $2,300 had been raised via GoFundMe, yet a deficit of $80,000 remained, and their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. She lowered her head onto the table, surrendering to a wave of silent tears, the way she always did. She couldn't allow Malachi to witness his mother's despair. Unbeknownst to her, the gentleman to whom she'd offered her coat was at that very moment orchestrating a turn of events that would irrevocably alter their circumstances. 3 days later, at precisely 6:30 in the evening, Clarence entered Mama T's kitchen on North Avenue. He had eschewed his customary suit, opting instead for a nondescript gray pullover, plain trousers, and a flat cap pulled low, obscuring his forehead. He wore no watch, no cufflinks, nothing that might betray his identity. He presented as any retired gentleman seeking a tranquil meal. Odessa had informed him of Keandra's place of employment. He told himself he merely wished to see her one final time to confirm an intuition he already held. But the truth was, he needed to. Something about that woman had penetrated his defenses in a way that nothing had in years. The establishment was modest, with perhaps 15 tables, half of which were occupied. The aroma of collard greens and fried chicken greeted him upon entry, a scent that evoked memories of his own mother's kitchen. A lifetime ago, he took a seat at a corner table by the window and picked up the laminated menu. Moments later, Keandra appeared, clad in the restaurant's uniform, a simple black shirt and an apron tied at her waist. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She appeared weary, the same profound exhaustion he'd observed at the bus stop, yet she offered a genuine smile, the kind that requires significant effort when one is running on reserves. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Mama T's. May I offer you a beverage?" She paused abruptly, her eyes widening. "Oh my goodness, you're the gentleman from the bus stop from the other night." Clarence offered a smile. "Indeed. Are you well? Did you find somewhere warm that night? I was concerned about you." "I'm quite well, miss. More than well, actually. Your coat was a lifesaver." Keandra's face softened with relief. "I'm so relieved. I couldn't stop thinking about you. My son inquired about you as well. He wanted to know if the gentleman who was shivering found warmth." "Your son?" "The little fellow who approached me first. That's Malachi. He possesses a remarkable kindness." Something flickered across her features. "The greatest kindness I know. Even if his heart doesn't function perfectly." Clarence leaned forward subtly. "What do you mean by that?" Keandra hesitated. She was not prone to confiding in strangers, but this elderly gentleman exuded an aura of safety. Perhaps it was his prior vulnerability, or perhaps he reminded her of her grandfather. "He has a congenital heart condition," she stated quietly. "He was born with it. He requires surgery, but it's quite complex. The cost is, well, substantial. We are actively seeking solutions." "I'm sorry to hear that. He appeared to be a robust young boy." "He is the most resilient child I know." Her voice wavered for a fleeting second before she straightened and smiled again. "He simply needs an opportunity. That's all. Just a chance. Clarence nodded slowly. I am confident he will receive one. Might I suggest the smothered pork chops? That is tonight's special. Miss T prepares them from scratch. They conversed a bit more as Keandra brought his meal. She checked on him periodically between attending to other tables, perpetually in motion, perpetually working. Clarence observed her with keen attention. He noted how she remembered the names of every regular patron, how she refilled the sweet tea for the elderly couple in the corner without being asked, how she discreetly placed an extra piece of cornbread on the plate of a solitary elderly woman. When a diner at table 4 impatiently snapped his fingers and complained his food was cold, Keandra offered a sincere apology and delivered a fresh plate within 4 minutes, exhibiting no trace of annoyance or eye-rolling, only composed grace under pressure. Upon finishing his meal, Clarence placed a $100 bill folded beneath the edge of his plate. He rose quietly, donned his cap, and proceeded towards the exit. He was halfway down the block when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. Sir, please wait. Keandra caught up to him, slightly out of breath, holding the $100 bill. I believe there's been a mistake. You left a $100 bill. Your meal was only $14. Clarence regarded her. This woman, who was in desperate need of $80,000, who was submerged in medical debt, who had likely foregone any personal purchases for months, was now chasing him down the street to return what she perceived as an accidental overpayment. It was not an error, my dear, he said gently. You earned it. Sir, I cannot accept this. It's far too much. Then consider it a token of appreciation from a grateful elder who was cold and alone and who encountered someone sufficiently compassionate to offer solace. Keandra's eyes welled up. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She carefully folded the bill and held it close to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. You cannot comprehend the significance of this gesture. I believe I have some understanding, Clarence replied softly. Take good care of that boy. He's fortunate to have you. He turned and walked away into the evening air. Keandra remained on the sidewalk, watching him depart, clutching the $100 bill as if it were solid gold. She was unaware of his name. She did not know he owned the very hospital that had turned her son away. She had no inkling that what was about to transpire would transform her existence forever. But Clarence knew, and his plans were just beginning. A week later, everything unraveled. It was a Tuesday, 11:15 in the morning. Malachi was seated at his desk in Miss Tanya's second-grade classroom at Barkley Elementary, engrossed in coloring a rocket ship, when his crayon slipped from his grasp. He clutched his chest, his face draining of color, and then he slid sideways from his chair, collapsing onto the floor. Miss Tanya cried out. 2 children began to weep. The school nurse arrived within 90 seconds. She checked his pulse. It was rapid and irregular. His lips had turned a dark blue, and his skin felt cold and clammy. She promptly called 911. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. The paramedics carefully placed Malachi onto a stretcher. He was conscious, but barely. His eyes were open, glassy, and unfocused. He repeated one word incessantly, Mama. The nearest hospital equipped with a pediatric cardiac unit was Drummond Medical Center, a mere 8 minutes away. The ambulance sped through the streets of East Baltimore, its siren wailing urgently. At 11:32, Keandra's phone rang. She was on the 4th floor of the Harborview Inn, stripping sheets from a king-size bed in room 412. That room number would be seared into her memory for the rest of her life. Miss Carter, this is Principal Watkins from Barkley Elementary. Your son, Malachi, collapsed in class. An ambulance has transported him to Drummond Medical Center. You need to get there immediately. Keandra dropped the sheets. She didn't retrieve her bag. She didn't clock out. She didn't inform her supervisor. She simply ran down the hallway, descended 4 flights of stairs, and burst out the front door of the hotel into the frigid December air, still in her gray housekeeping uniform, her name tag pinned to her chest. She couldn't afford a taxi. The bus would take 30 minutes, so she ran. 6 blocks to the number 7 bus stop, she boarded the bus just in the nick of time, endured 12 agonizing minutes of travel, and then ran another 3 blocks from the bus stop to the hospital entrance. She barged through the emergency room doors at 12:08, her hair disheveled, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. My son, Malachi Carter. He was brought in by ambulance. Where is he? A nurse guided her down a long, sterile white corridor to the pediatric emergency unit, and there he was, Malachi, her baby, lying on a hospital bed that seemed far too large for his small frame. Wires were attached to his chest, an IV line snaked into his arm, an oxygen mask covered his face, and monitors beeped with a steady, mechanical rhythm. He appeared so small, so vulnerable, like a delicate leaf that a gust of wind could carry away. Keandra grasped his hand. It was ice cold. "Baby, I'm here. Mama's here." Malachi's eyes fluttered open. He attempted a smile from beneath the oxygen mask. His voice emerged thin, barely a whisper. "Mama, don't cry. I'm okay." But he wasn't okay, and Keandra knew it. Dr. Patterson, the attending cardiologist, led Keandra into the hallway 10 minutes later. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a voice clearly practiced in delivering grave news with gentleness. "Ms. Carter, your son's condition has significantly deteriorated. The tetralogy of Fallot, which was diagnosed earlier, involves 4 structural defects in his heart: the ventricular septal defect, the pulmonary valve stenosis, the right ventricular hypertrophy, and the overriding aorta. All 4 of these issues are now creating a critical situation. His blood oxygen saturation levels are perilously low." "What does that entail?" Keandra inquired, though she already suspected the answer. "It means he requires surgery, open-heart surgery. We must address all 4 defects simultaneously, and we must do so within 48 hours. Any delay beyond that time frame substantially increases the risk of cardiac arrest." 48 hours. 2 days. That was all the time her son had left. "The estimated cost for the procedure is approximately $220,000, Dr. Patterson continued. "I understand that is a considerable sum, and I want you to know that our financial services team can explore options with you." "I'll sign anything," Keandra declared without hesitation. "I'll pay whatever it takes. Just save my son." "I understand. Allow me to connect you with our billing department." 20 minutes later, Keandra sat opposite a woman in a beige blazer in a small office on the first floor. The woman had a computer screen before her and a practiced, professional demeanor that conveyed no warmth. "Ms. Carter, I've reviewed your insurance coverage. Your Medicaid plan will cover a portion of the procedure, but there is a remaining balance of approximately $87,000. Without insurance pre-approval or a deposit of at least $40,000, we are unable to schedule the surgery at this time." "At this time," Keandra's voice cracked. "My son could pass away in 48 hours. What do you mean, at this time?" "I comprehend your distress and I apologize. However, hospital policy mandates financial clearance before we can proceed with elective surgical interventions." "Elective? There is nothing elective about this. My 7-year-old son is upstairs at this very moment with a broken heart, and you are telling me you will not fix it because I lack $40,000? The woman looked down at her keyboard. "I can provide you with a list of financial assistance programs and emergency funding resources. Some of these have expedited review processes." Keandra stared at her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The clock on the wall ticked, and for the first time in 7 years of relentless struggle, Keandra felt utterly lost, with no idea how to proceed. She walked back upstairs to Malachi's room. She sat down in the plastic chair beside his bed. She took his hand again. Malachi looked up at her. "Mama, why are you sad?" "I'm not sad, baby. I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About how much I love you." Malachi smiled. That broad, radiant smile capable of illuminating any space, even a hospital room filled with beeping machines and fluorescent lights. "I love you too, Mama. More than rocket ships." Keandra pressed his hand against her cheek and closed her eyes. 48 hours. $40,000. And a system that would permit a child to die over bureaucratic paperwork. She had never felt more profoundly alone. Yet, she was not entirely alone. Because 2 floors above, in an office bearing his name, a phone began to ring. Odessa Monroe answered on the first ring. She had been anticipating this very moment since the boy had been brought through the emergency room doors. She dialed Clarence before her coffee had even cooled. "Clarence, it's Odessa. That boy you inquired about, Malachi Carter. He was just admitted through the ER." A silence emanated from the other end. "It's serious, Clarence. His oxygen levels are critical. He collapsed at school this morning. Dr. Patterson is stabilizing him now, but the surgery cannot be postponed. He requires it within 48 hours. More silence. Then Clarence's voice, low and strained. "Who is the surgeon on call for pediatric cardiac?" "Dr. Patterson is capable of performing a standard repair, but this case is exceptionally complex. 4 defects. A 7-year-old's heart. This demands a specialist, Clarence. This requires Denzel." "Yes, it does." Clarence remained silent for a considerable period. Through the phone, Odessa could hear his breathing. She had known this man for 28 years. She understood the significance of that prolonged silence. He was making a decision. "Arrange a meeting with my son," Clarence stated finally. "Tonight my office at 8 o'clock. And if he refuses, then I will find an alternative. But he will not refuse, not after he hears what I have to tell him." Clarence terminated the call. He sat alone in his study at home, his gaze fixed upon a framed photograph on his desk. It was an old image, rendered in black and white, depicting a woman holding an infant. His mother cradling him, a photograph taken 2 years before her heart gave out. He picked it up, holding it for a long moment. "I will not allow this to happen again, Mama," he whispered. "Not in my hospital, not under my watch." That evening, precisely at 8 o'clock, Denzel entered his father's office at Drummond Medical Center. He was still in his surgical scrubs. He had been operating until 6:30, a routine valve replacement on a 60-year-old gentleman with excellent insurance. The surgery had concluded flawlessly. It always did. Denzel's hands never faltered. It was his heart that had grown silent. Clarence stood by the window, observing the Baltimore skyline. He did not turn as Denzel entered. "You said it was urgent." "Sit down, son." Denzel sat. He crossed his arms. His posture conveyed his readiness for conflict. Clarence turned around, and instead of issuing a directive, instead of asserting his authority, instead of employing any of the tactics Denzel anticipated, he recounted a story. He told Denzel about the night it rained, about sitting on a bus stop bench, drenched to the bone after a board meeting, about a little boy who tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked, "Mama, that man is shaking. Can we help him?" He spoke of a woman who removed her only coat and draped it around a stranger's shoulders, a woman who was freezing, weary, and barely subsisting, a woman whose son required a $220,000 surgery that she could not afford. "That woman's son is in this hospital right now," Clarence declared. "Room 314, pediatric cardiac unit, Malachi Carter, 7 years old, suffering from tetralogy of Fallot. He requires surgery within the next 48 hours, or he will perish." And the billing department informed his mother they cannot schedule it without a $40,000 deposit. Denzel's jaw tightened. "Dad, I've heard this narrative before. You cannot rectify the entire healthcare system by shaming me into performing free surgeries. I am not attempting to fix the entire healthcare system. I am attempting to save one boy. And what about the next one? And the one after that? Where does it end?" Clarence leaned forward. "When you were 12 years old, you told me you aspired to be a heart surgeon. Do you recall what you said when I asked you why?" Denzel remained silent. "You said, 'Because I want to mend what is broken within people, Dad, not just their hearts. Everything.'" Denzel's expression flickered. For a brief instant, a flicker of something stirred behind his eyes. "That was a child speaking," he said. "The real world doesn't operate that way." "Then why must a 7-year-old boy die because the real world doesn't operate that way?" The room fell silent. The clock on the wall ticked. Neither man moved. "You are attempting to guilt-trip me," Denzel stated, but his voice had lost its accusatory edge. "No, I am reminding you of who you are. You took an oath, Denzel. You stood before your professors and your classmates, and you swore to do no harm. You swore to prioritize the patient, not the billing department, not the board of directors, the patient. Do you believe I'm unaware of that? Denzel's voice escalated. Do you believe I do not contemplate it every single day? I became a doctor to assist people, Dad, but this hospital operates on financial resources, and every charity case we undertake leads to another confrontation with the board, another battle I must endure. I am weary of fighting. Then cease your battles with the board, Clarence said quietly, and commence fighting for the boy. Denzel rose to his feet. His chair scraped against the floor. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the handle. Room 314? He inquired without turning around. Room 314. Denzel opened the door and exited. He had not uttered a definitive yes, but neither had he said no. And Clarence remained seated, his hands clasped, hoping that somewhere within his brilliant, obstinate, wounded son, the 12-year-old boy who yearned to mend what was broken still existed. The following morning, at 6:15, Denzel entered Drummond Medical Center through the staff entrance. He rationalized to himself that he was merely going to review the file, examine the imaging, and ascertain if the case was even surgically feasible. He was not going to visit the patient. He was absolutely not going to become emotionally entangled. He accessed Malachi's chart on his tablet. Tetralogy of Fallot, severe. The echocardiogram clearly depicted all 4 defects. The ventricular septal defect was substantial. The pulmonary stenosis was critical. The right ventricular hypertrophy was advanced. And the overriding aorta was positioned precisely where it should not be. It was a complex case, textbook in its presentation, yet undeniably intricate. Denzel studied the imaging for 20 minutes. He ran the numbers in his mind. Surgical approach, bypass duration, recovery protocols. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. This was the aspect of medicine he relished, the intricate puzzle, the absolute precision, the certainty that his skills could indeed be the determinant between life and death. Then he made an error. He walked past room 314 on his way to the surgical wing, and the door was ajar. Malachi was awake, propped up in bed, a crayon in one hand and a sheet of paper in the other. The IV line extended from his arm to a bag suspended from a metal pole. The oxygen monitor was clipped to his finger, casting a soft red glow. His lips still bore that faint blue tinge that Denzel had observed in countless patients. Yet he was drawing, his tongue protruding slightly in concentration, completely absorbed. Keandra sat beside him in the plastic chair, reading from a picture book in a voice that was warm and animated, skillfully adopting different inflections for each character. Her eyes were red and swollen from weeping, but her voice remained steady, never faltering in front of her son. Malachi looked up and saw Denzel standing in the doorway. His face broke into a wide grin. "Hi, mister. Are you a doctor? You look like a doctor." Denzel hesitated. He should continue walking. He should review the file from his office. He should not do this. "Yes," he heard himself say. "I am a doctor." "Can you fix my heart because my heart is broken, like actually broken, not like in the sad songs?" Something within Denzel fractured, something he had meticulously held together for years with schedules, spreadsheets, and board meetings. He walked into the room. "I am Dr. Drummond," he stated. "And what is your name?" "Malachi. And this is my mama. She's a queen." Keandra looked up, startled. "Malachi, don't bother the doctor." "He's not bothering me," Denzel replied. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. "So, Malachi, what are you drawing?" Malachi proudly held up the paper. It was a crayon drawing of a woman wearing a large golden crown. She was smiling and had long curly hair. Behind him, a celestial expanse and what resembled a grand fortress were visible. "That's my mother," Malachi declared, his voice tinged with youthful conviction. "I depicted her as a queen because she truly is one, though she may not yet realize it." Denzel examined the artwork, then glanced at Keandra, who was pressing a hand to her lips, fighting back tears. His gaze returned to Malachi. 7 years of age, with lips the color of twilight and a heart that ached, he had rendered his mother as royalty while she lay in a hospital bed, his way of conveying her immense significance when words failed him. "That's a remarkably skilled drawing," Denzel commented, his tone heavy. "You can have it if you wish," Malachi offered magnanimously. "I can create another for Mama." "I would appreciate that very much. Thank you, Malachi." Denzel remained for 15 minutes, captivated by Malachi's tales of interstellar spacecraft, his preferred animated programs, and the canine companion he longed for as he grew. He observed the boy's oxygen saturation on the monitor, noting how Keandra's hand remained clasped with her son's throughout their entire interaction, a gesture of unwavering connection. He also noticed the housekeeping attire she was still wearing, the identification badge, and the shoes worn down at the heels from prolonged standing. Upon exiting the room, he paused in the corridor for a considerable time, utterly alone, clutching a crayon depiction of a queen. Subsequently, he sought out Keandra. She was standing by a vending machine at the far end of the hall, her gaze fixed on the array of choices, yet making no purchase, mindful of every cent. "Miss Carter," he addressed her. She turned, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "I am Dr. Denzel Drummond. I am a pediatric cardiac surgeon. I have reviewed your son's medical records and imaging. While his condition is critical, it is amenable to surgical intervention. I would like to perform his operation." Keandra's expression shifted through a rapid succession of emotions: hope, bewilderment, and apprehension. "I am truly grateful for your offer, doctor. I am. However, I have been informed that without $40,000, they will not schedule the procedure, and I do not possess that sum. I have exhausted all avenues." Denzel met her gaze, observing this woman who labored at 2 jobs, who had once offered her coat to a stranger in the pouring rain, and who now stood in a hospital corridor clad in her work uniform, striving to preserve her son's life. "I did not inquire about payment," he stated. "I asked if you would permit me to save your son." Keandra blinked, her eyes widening. "What?" "The surgery. I will proceed with it tomorrow morning. No upfront payment, no involvement from the billing department, simply myself, my team, and your son." "I don't comprehend," she murmured, her voice laced with disbelief. "Why? Why would you extend such an offer?" Denzel was silent for a moment. He recalled the somber expression on his father's face the previous evening. He reflected on the solemn vow he had taken. He thought of a 12-year-old boy who had once yearned to mend all that was broken, a sentiment that had reignited his purpose in medicine. Keandra gazed at him, her chin quivering. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. Instead, she could only nod repeatedly, her affirmation a silent cascade of tears. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You cannot possibly imagine the significance of this." "I believe I have some understanding," Denzel replied softly, and he genuinely did. Then, a realization dawned on Keandra. Something shifted behind her eyes. "Drummond. Your name is Drummond, like the hospital." "Yes. My father established this institution." Keandra regarded him for a prolonged period. A fleeting expression crossed her face, a shadow of recognition, a nascent question. However, it did not fully materialize. Not yet. "Your father must be a man of great integrity," she ventured. Denzel considered his father, seated alone in his study, imploring his son to recall his fundamental calling. "He is," Denzel confirmed quietly. "Indeed, he is." The surgical procedure was slated for 6 o'clock in the morning. Keandra was awake by 4. Sleep had eluded her. She had spent the night in the plastic chair beside Malachi's bed, observing the rise and fall of his chest, counting his breaths as she had done countless times before. Yet this night held a profound difference. Tonight might be the final occasion she needed to count. At precisely 5:15, 2 nurses entered to prepare Malachi. Their demeanor was gentle and compassionate. One of them offered a warm smile and addressed Malachi as though he were the most crucial individual in the entire facility, for in that moment he truly was. Malachi was drowsy but conscious. He was dressed in a modest hospital gown adorned with tiny celestial motifs. He appeared exceptionally small in the garment, so delicate, akin to a fledgling with a fractured wing. "Mama, I am right here, my darling," he whispered. "When I awaken, will my heart be mended?" Kiandra knelt beside the bed, gently cupping his face in her hands, her gaze locked with his. "Yes, my sweet. When you wake, you will be able to run with all your might. No more sitting out during recess, no more feeling winded on the stairs. You are going to run, Malachi, as swiftly as the wind." A broad, radiant smile spread across his face. "Faster than Jalen. Infinitely faster than Jalen." He let out a soft giggle. Then his expression turned serious. "Mama, are you frightened?" "A little, but do not be. The doctor with the kind voice assured me he would care for me, and I believe him." Kiandra pressed her lips to his forehead, holding them there, allowing herself to inhale his presence, the scent of antiseptic soap, the faint aroma of youthful exertion, and something subtly sweet beneath it all, an essence uniquely Malachi. "I love you more than anything in this existence," she whispered. "I love you more than rocket ships, Mama." The nurses wheeled him away at 5:45. Kiandra walked alongside the gurney, her hand clasped with his, until they reached the double doors marked "Surgical Unit, Authorized Personnel Only." A nurse gently touched her arm. "This is as far as you may accompany him, Miss Carter. We will ensure he receives excellent care." Malachi offered a small wave. "See you when I wake up, Mama." The doors swung shut and Kiandra remained, her gaze fixed on them, her hand still outstretched, reaching for a grasp that was no longer there. 5 minutes later, Rashida found her in that state. She enfolded her daughter in a tight embrace, holding on firmly. Neither spoke. They simply stood in the hallway, clinging to each other, while somewhere behind those doors, a surgical team prepared to enter the chest of a 7-year-old boy and rectify a flaw present since his birth. The designated waiting area was situated on the 3rd floor. It featured modest beige walls, seating made of plastic, a television in the corner silently displaying the morning news, a vending machine humming in the adjacent corridor, and a wall clock whose second hand seemed to advance with agonizing slowness, unlike any clock Kiandra had ever observed. They took their seats. Rashida retrieved a pair of knitting needles and a skein of yellow yarn from her bag, commencing her knitting. This was not born from a need for a scarf, but rather a necessity for her hands to remain occupied. If they were still, they would tremble. At precisely 7:30, Odessa entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She placed one before Kiandra and another before Rashida. "How are you holding up?" baby Odessa inquired. Kiandra looked at the coffee, unable to fathom consuming anything at that moment. Her stomach felt like a tightly clenched fist. "What are they doing to him in there?" Rashida asked softly. "Can you explain it in terms I can comprehend?" Odessa sat down beside her. "Presently, Malachi is connected to a heart-lung bypass apparatus. This signifies that a machine is undertaking the functions of his heart and lungs while the surgeons perform their work. Dr. Drummond will be meticulously closing the opening between the 2 lower chambers of Malachi's heart. Subsequently, he will enlarge the passage leading to the lungs to facilitate increased blood flow. He will then repair the pulmonary valve to ensure its proper opening and closing. Finally, he will reposition the aorta to ensure it draws blood from the correct origin." 4 procedures, Rashida observed, her voice quiet. "They are addressing 4 distinct issues concurrently." "Yes, ma'am. 4 congenital defects addressed in a single operation. The duration typically spans between 5 and 7 hours. Rashida nodded slowly, her knitting needles never ceasing their rhythmic motion. Click, click, click. "And after," Kiandra began, her voice hesitant. "When it is successful," Odessa corrected gently, "he will be in the intensive care unit for a few days, followed by a period of recovery and physical rehabilitation. However, if all proceeds as anticipated, within a few months, that young boy will be running around as if he were brand new." Kiandra closed her eyes, pressing her palms together in her lap, and offered a silent prayer in the manner her mother had taught her and her grandmother had taught her mother. 1 hour elapsed, then 2, then 3. Keandra paced relentlessly across the confined waiting room, 12 steps in one direction, 12 steps back. The soft sound of her shoes echoed on the linoleum floor. Back and forth, back and forth. Rashida continued to knit. The yellow yarn gradually transformed into something amorphous, yet beautiful. Her lips moved silently, engaged in prayer or counting stitches, perhaps both. At 10 o'clock, a nurse emerged. "He is progressing well. Dr. Drummond is currently closing the septal defect. Everything remains on schedule." Keandra nodded, unable to articulate a response. 4 hours passed. 5 hours. The vending machine hummed persistently. The clock ticked audibly. A nurse's footsteps squeaked in the corridor. A doctor's name was paged over the intercom. The world continued its ceaseless movement, but within the confines of that waiting room, time seemed to have come to a standstill. 2 floors above, in his private office, Clarence Drummond occupied his desk. His computer monitor displayed the live feed from the security camera overlooking the 3rd floor waiting area. He watched Keandra's agitated pacing. He observed Rashida's focused knitting. He noted Odessa's quiet presence beside them, a figure of steadfast reassurance, much like a lighthouse. And for the first time in a span he could scarcely recall, Clarence Drummond wept. His tears were not for the hospital, nor for the board of directors, nor for himself. He wept for a mother who had selflessly given her coat to a stranger, for a boy who had drawn queens with crayons, and for a world that presented such formidable obstacles to good people. He wept because his son was presently downstairs, performing the very task for which he was divinely intended, saving a life, not for monetary gain, not for the board, but for a child, precisely as it was always meant to be. At 12:17 in the afternoon, 6 hours and 32 minutes after the commencement of the surgery, the double doors swung open. Denzel emerged, still attired in his surgical gown, his mask now lowered around his neck. His eyes, though weary, conveyed a sense of clarity. Keandra ceased her pacing. Rashida set down her knitting needles. The room fell into absolute silence. "Miss Carter." Keandra's breath hitched. "The surgery was successful. We have repaired all 4 defects. His heart is beating independently, strong and consistent. Malachi will be all right." For a moment, an unnerving stillness prevailed. The words hung in the air, as if requiring a brief interval to become tangible reality. Then, Keandra's knees buckled. Rashida caught her, and they embraced, sobbing uncontrollably in the center of that beige waiting room, with its muted television and humming vending machine. Their tears were so profound that a passing nurse in the corridor paused, her hand instinctively flying to her chest. Keandra gently pulled away from her mother and reached for Denzel's hand. She clasped it firmly in both of hers. "Thank you," she expressed, her voice a poignant blend of brokenness and beauty. "Thank you for granting my son a chance." Denzel looked at her, and something in his demeanor had altered, softened, appearing more open, as if a window that had been sealed for years had finally creaked ajar. "He gave me something in return," Denzel conveyed. "He reminded me of the profound importance of this endeavor." Odessa stood in the corner, a silent observer. She uttered no words but offered a gentle smile, wiping away a tear. An hour later, Keandra was permitted entry into the intensive care unit. Malachi lay asleep, an array of tubes extending from his arms and chest. An oxygen line rested beneath his nose. Wires connected him to a monitor that emitted a soft beep with each cardiac contraction. However, this time, the rhythm was distinct. It was steady, even, and robust. For the first time in 7 years, Malachi Carter's heart beat as it was intended. Keandra sat beside him, taking his small hand in hers. She remained silent, listening intently to the steady, beautiful beeping, the audible manifestation of her son's finely mended heart. 3 days later, Malachi was sitting upright in bed, enjoying a bowl of orange gelatin and grumbling about the itchiness of his hospital gown. His complexion had improved, and his lips, once pale, were now tinged with pink. Keandra gazed at them with a sense of wonder, as if beholding her son anew. That afternoon, a nurse entered and informed Keandra that someone wished to meet her, a benefactor who had fully covered the cost of Malika's surgery. "A donor?" Keandra inquired, a slight frown creasing her brow. "I was unaware anyone was covering these expenses. I believed Dr. Drummond had made arrangements through the hospital." "The benefactor wishes to discuss the matter in person. Conference room B on the 4th floor. At your convenience." Keandra kissed Maliki's forehead, instructed Rashida to remain with him, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. She smoothed her hair and straightened her attire, still clad in the same jeans and sweater she had been wearing for the past 3 days. She opened the door to conference room B. A man was seated at the far end of the table, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark blue suit, complete with silver cufflinks. His white hair was neatly styled. His deep brown eyes, as he looked up, held a complex mixture of gratitude, remorse, and hope. Keandra recognized him instantly. "You," she whispered, "you are the gentleman from the bus stop." Clarence Drummond rose slowly. "Yes," he confirmed, "and I owe you a profound explanation." Keandra did not sit. She remained standing in the doorway, her hand still resting on the door handle, as if prepared to depart at any moment. "My name is Clarence Drummond. I am the founder of this hospital." The room seemed to spin. Keandra felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted precariously. "That evening at the bus stop," Clarence continued, "I was not feigning distress. I was experiencing the nadir of my existence. I had just exited a board meeting where my own son, my own flesh and blood, had asserted that preserving this hospital's mission was not worth the financial expenditure. I was incensed. My heart was broken. I departed into the rain, unsure of where else to turn." He paused, and then a small boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and inquired if they could offer me assistance. Keandra's jaw tightened. She listened intently, her eyes watchful and guarded. "You gave me your coat, your soul coat, in December during a downpour, and you had no notion of who I was. You were unaware that I possessed the capacity to reciprocate your kindness. You simply perceived a man who was cold, and you extended your aid." "Then," Keandra inquired, her voice steady, "what transpired thereafter?" "I ascertained your identity. I learned of Maliki and his medical condition, and I discovered that my hospital, the very institution I established to serve families like yours, had denied your son treatment due to a billing policy. You orchestrated all of this," Keandra stated, not as a question, but as a firm declaration. "The surgery, Denzel, the entire arrangement. I implored my son to perform the duty for which he was trained, for which he felt a calling. However, Keandra, I did not instill the compassion in him. He entered that room, saw your son, and something within him shifted. That was genuine." Keandra was silent for a considerable duration. She walked to the window and gazed out at the Baltimore skyline, the harbor, the buildings, the streets where she had spent her entire life grappling with hardship. "I am profoundly grateful," she stated finally. "I will remain grateful for the remainder of my days that my son is alive, that his heart beats, that he will grow to adulthood." She turned back to face him. "But Mr. Drummond, what about the next mother? The one who does not happen to bestow her coat upon a billionaire? The one presently seated in that waiting room, facing the same financial burdens I did, with no one to champion her cause? What becomes of her?" The question landed on Clarence like a stone cast into calm waters. He opened his mouth, then closed it, for she was unequivocally correct and he knew it. "That," Clarence replied softly, "is precisely the question I have been posing to myself, and I believe I have finally arrived at an answer." 1 week later, Clarence convened an emergency session of the Drummond Medical Center Board of Directors. Every seat at the long conference table was occupied. Denzel was seated to his father's right. For the first time in many years, they occupied the same side of the table. Clarence stood at the head of the room, eschewing notes and presentations, speaking directly from his conviction. 40 years ago, I established this hospital because my mother succumbed to a cardiac condition that could have been successfully treated had our family possessed the financial means. On opening day, I stood on the steps and made a solemn promise. This hospital will never turn away a child. I have broken that promise. The room was enveloped in silence. 3 weeks ago, a 7-year-old boy collapsed at his school due to a failing heart. His mother contacted this hospital 4 times, pleading for assistance. 4 times, she was advised to return when she could produce $40,000. That boy nearly perished, not due to a failure in medicine, but because we failed him. He surveyed the individuals around the table. Today, I am announcing the establishment of the Malachi Fund, named in honor of that young boy. This fund will fully cover the expenses of cardiac surgery for any child under the age of 18 who is unable to afford treatment, irrespective of their insurance status. It will be financed through the allocation of 15% of the hospital's annual operating surplus. Murmurs rippled through the room. A board member, clad in a gray suit, leaned forward. Clarence, 15% of the surplus represents millions of dollars annually. The shareholders will not consent to this. Then I shall acquire their shares, Clarence stated calmly. Every single share, utilizing my personal assets, and I will convert this hospital into a fully non-profit entity. My legal counsel has already prepared the necessary documentation. Silence descended. Denzel rose to his feet. All eyes in the room shifted to him. I've dedicated 15 years to mending hearts on operating tables, Denzel declared. I'm recognized as one of the foremost cardiac surgeons in this nation. However, my intense focus on the scientific aspects caused me to overlook the human element. A 7-year-old boy served as a stark reminder, as did his mother. He paused. I am committing to performing 2 pro bono surgeries per month through the Malachi Fund, and I urge every surgeon within this hospital to consider a similar commitment. He met his father's gaze. Clarence returned the look, and between them, something that had been fractured for a considerable time began to mend. The board cast their votes reluctantly, 11 in favor to 3 opposed. Following the meeting, Clarence requested Keandra's presence in his office. I have a proposal for you, he stated. This hospital requires a patient advocate, an individual whose responsibility will be to guide families through the intricate system, ensuring that no mother finds herself alone in that waiting room, overwhelmed by paperwork and fear. The position offers an annual salary of $62,000, inclusive of comprehensive benefits, health, dental, and vision. I wish for you to accept this role. Keandra stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and apprehension. You want me to work here, at the hospital? I want you to do here what you already excel at in every other aspect of your life, caring for others. Mr. Drummond, I am not a physician. I am not a nurse. I clean hotel rooms and serve meals. You are a mother who courageously confronted the entire healthcare system to save your son. You intimately understand the struggles these families endure because you have lived them. There is no academic degree that can impart such wisdom. Patient advocacy is one of the most rapidly expanding professions in American healthcare. While the Affordable Care Act has broadened coverage, millions of families still fall through the existing gaps. They require someone on their side, someone who speaks their language, someone who has traversed their path. Keandra remained silent for a moment. Why me? She inquired. Because when you sat in that waiting room, filled with terror and isolation, you vowed to find a solution. And you did. I wish for you to help other mothers find their way as well. Keandra contemplated his words for an extended period. She recalled the hotel rooms, the restaurant shifts, the relentless cycle of bills. She envisioned Malachi upstairs in his hospital bed, sketching images of rocket ships and queens. And she remembered the woman in the billing office, the one in the beige blazer, who had looked at her computer screen and declared, without a deposit of at least $40,000, we cannot schedule the surgery at this time. In that moment, Keandra had felt a profound loneliness, more acute than anything she had ever experienced. I will do it, she said, her voice firm. Not for the remuneration, but because I comprehend the feeling of sitting in that waiting room alone, and no one should ever have to endure that. Clarence offered a genuine smile, one that emanated from a deep wellspring of sincerity. Welcome to Drummond Medical Center, Keandra. 1 year later, Malachi Carter, now 8 years old, was running. Not a brisk walk, nor a light jog, but a full-fledged sprint. His arms pumped vigorously, his legs flew across the schoolyard at Barclay Elementary as he chased Jalen Thompson in a race he had anticipated his entire life. He crossed the finish line in first place, raising his hands in triumph, not even appearing winded. Miss Tanya stood on the sidelines, her hand pressed to her mouth, recalling the day he had collapsed in her classroom. She recalled the urgent call to emergency services. A chilling thought had gripped her, the possibility of never witnessing that radiant smile again. Yet here he was, beaming brighter than ever, healthy and vibrant, in motion. Miles away, in the corridors of Drummond Medical Center, Keandra stood, a patient advocate by title, distinguished by her navy blue blazer and identification badge. Her hair was meticulously styled and her shoes brand new. Before her, a young woman wept in a utilitarian plastic chair, clutching a bundle of medical invoices and a critical referral for her daughter's heart operation. The figures on the documents were staggering, and the raw apprehension etched on the woman's face was a painfully familiar sight. Keandra knelt, gently taking the woman's hands. "I understand precisely what you're enduring," Keandra stated, her voice steady, "and I will guide you through this. Every single stage. You are not by yourself." The woman lifted her gaze, a flicker of hope piercing through her tears. In its inaugural year, the Malachi Fund had successfully financed the complete surgical treatment for 47 young individuals. 47 families who, without this support, would have faced denial. 47 children who were now able to resume their active lives. Denzel, on his part, was performing 2 surgeries each month without charge. He had also established a guidance initiative for emerging surgeons, instilling in them the principle that medicine encompassed far more than technical skill. It was fundamentally about human connection. He and Clarence now shared a meal every Sunday evening. While disagreements occasionally arose, their commitment to being present for each other remained unwavering. Clarence continued his daily excursions through East Baltimore, no longer in disguise or to observe anyone in particular. His walks served to maintain his grounded perspective, reminding him that the world's realities, viewed from the humble perch of a bus stop bench, were starkly different from those perceived from a lofty 14th floor office. And each time his path led him past that specific bench on Eastern Avenue, the very spot where he had once shivered in the downpour, a smile would grace his lips. That bench represented the turning point, the genesis of transformation. That very evening, Keandra arrived home from her professional duties. She opened the door to the modest residence she had managed to secure in a more desirable district. It was clean, bathed in light, with 2 bedrooms and a garden for Malachi to roam. Malachi, her son, practically a small whirlwind, collided with her legs. She swept him into her arms, holding him close. He carried the wholesome scent of grass and exertion, his cheeks flushed from play. His lips were a vibrant pink, exquisitely so. "I bested Jalen today," he announced, his voice full of childish triumph, "by a considerable margin." "I'm so immensely proud of you, my darling." She carried him inside and set him down. He promptly darted to his room, eager to draw. As Keandra removed her coat by the entrance, her gaze alighted upon the wall above the sofa. There, enclosed in a simple wooden frame, was a child's crayon masterpiece. It depicted a woman with curly hair, adorned with a magnificent golden crown, surrounded by stars, with a castle in the backdrop. At the base, inscribed in a characteristic 7-year-old scrawl, were the words, "My mama, she's a queen. She just doesn't know it yet." Keandra paused for a moment, her eyes fixed on the drawing. She reflected on the immense journey that had unfolded. A chilling night, a man, huddled and cold, a $12 coat, a broken spirit mended, a flawed system rectified, a life salvaged, not merely Malachi's, but her own, Clarence's, Denzel's, and those of 47 other families who would remain oblivious to the pivotal moment when it all began. That night, she hadn't just given away a coat, she had offered a fragment of her very being, and in return, the universe had reciprocated abundantly. From down the hallway, Malachi's voice called out, "Mama, come see, I'm drawing a new picture. It's you and me and rocket ships." Keandra blinked back tears, a gentle smile spreading across her face as she went to join her son. "Thank you for accompanying us on this narrative. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might benefit from its message today. Subscribe to ensure you don't miss future installments. And remember, the most profound impact can sometimes stem from the smallest gesture of compassion, potentially saving a life that was unknowingly at risk. Sending love to all.